Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zones. Thank you so much for joining another edition of Trailhead Live. My name is Mohit, and I'm a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. I've been joined by Julian Duque. He's our Heroku expert here. Um, so, before we actually begin our conversation today, let's do some housekeeping. So, our forward-looking statements here. Please do not make any purchasing decisions based on anything that is forward-looking in this presentation. Over to you, Julian.
Of course. Hello again. My name is Julian Duque. I'm a lead developer advocate here at Salesforce, working mainly with Heroku. I'm super happy to join you again on this series, Mohit. To remember our audience, we are doing a series of modern application development on the Salesforce platform, also using Heroku, and that's why Mohit and myself joined forces to bring you the best content and to teach you how to create enterprise grade and production grade applications leveraging the full Salesforce platform. So, what do we have for today, Mohit?
Yes, so today we're going to talk about data model design on Salesforce and Heroku data services. So last time, Julian, we covered a lot of the data model concepts. So I just want to recap, before we start to get into our hands-on activity, right? And then it will be all your show where, we will interactively show some of the Heroku database services. Now, let's get started with an overview of what is, how to create data models with clicks in Salesforce. Again, just a recap for all of you who are very new to Salesforce. Salesforce provides standard objects. They're usually tied to Salesforce licenses and features. They come with a lot of predefined use cases and functionalities, and you can really extend them with custom feeds. And then we have custom objects where you can create your own data model. If you want to bring an external source and external data into Salesforce, that's where we have external objects. Again, external objects relies on external data source definitions. Also, if you are working with like a very large data volume, that's usually for your auditing purposes or history tracking, then you're going to use big objects. I want to also mention about relationships in Salesforce. They're pretty important actually. They lay the foundation for your entire architecture. If you get this wrong, there's a possibility that your application might not scale. There are two types: lookup and master detail. Master detail is when your child object is like tightly coupled. Your record level sharing is sort of driven by the parent. Like that is the child record sharing is driven by the parent. With master detail, you certainly get something like roll-up summary, etc. But at the cost of sharing, requirements are pretty much locked with the parent. Lookup is more flexible in terms of that. Obviously it doesn't give you roll-up summary and things like that, but you still have the flexibility with the child records there. All right, and also you need to remember the slide. That is, in Salesforce, object data model metadata really depends or drives everything. Like, your page layouts, your field level security is defined for objects and fields, your profiles and permission sets. Your code component actually references those objects. You write your process automation like validation rules and flows on them. And then let's say you want to take analytics on the data, right? So use reports and dashboards. So everything depends on object model. That's why it's really critical. Now, this is the application that we were exploring, that is eCars. eCars is an application that we picked up. It's part of our sample gallery apps. There are a lot more apps like that you should definitely explore. But we picked up eCars specifically because it has good interfaces to Heroku, and we want to uncover as we progress in the series. Now, we move on to the activities section straight away, Julian. And Julian, feel free to ask me questions because I know that some of the content might be new for you.
Exactly. I will be asking a couple for sure.
Okay, awesome. So our first activity, Julian, is we're gonna create this e-cards data model, in the org, in Salesforce org, and then configure relationships, and then show our developers how they can sort of use Scratch orgs to build the data model, how they can sort of retrieve that metadata that they are creating in Salesforce into their local project. Okay. So with that, let's get started. Let's bring our Visual Studio Code IDE. So let me get to the Visual Studio Code ID here. So vscode.app. All right. So here's our Visual Studio Code, right? And for those of you, we actually spent whole session talking on Visual Studio Code. The recordings will be up today in case you have missed it. Anyway, so we start today, Julian, by creating a Salesforce DX, scaffold, like creating a project from the scratch, unlike other day where we just cloned the project and showed our developers how to do that, right? So today we're gonna like really create a project. So essentially all that you need to do is once you have the right tooling in place, you go and select SFDX create project, and then it's going to ask you to pick a template. Now, usually we pick up standard template because it comes with a lot of files that you need. Like for example, it comes with a prettier configuration. It comes with certain node modules that you need to, fire up your or enhance your development workflow. So we pick up the standard here. But if you are like creating a Salesforce functions project, which again is forward looking, we also have templates for that. And also, if you're creating an analytics project, we have template. Now, if you do not need any of these, you can always select empty. But let's start with standard. I'm gonna say e-cars app. It's just gonna ask me where I want to put this application. So let's for now put it in the, let's just put it on our desktop for now. So let's create the project. So it creates the project scaffold, as you can see, for us. And all the files, as I said, there's a force app project, there is a definition file that automatically got created, which pretty much is empty and barebone at this point. But let's say you need features or settings, you can configure them here. Also, there's this package.json that I was talking about that comes with it. It has built-in npm modules and scripts for running, let's say, unit tests using Jest, running your prettier, all the dev dependencies that are required to make your development workflow, we already have. And you can really basically fire up all of this by just running a simple npm install command to sort of get all these dependencies sort of worked out. So now once we have all this scaffold, I already have a DevHub org. Again, we talked about this in the first session, how to enable a DevHub org, how to sign up for one. So we have this. So let's just create a Scratch org today, Julian. So let's create a Scratch org where, we will be creating our data model. So I'm going to say, create a Scratch org, default Scratch org. It's going to ask for that definition file, which defines the shape of the org. Right, that we've been showing. In this case, it's pretty much empty, because we want empty org. I'm gonna put an alias for my Scratch org. And again, you can have more than one Scratch orgs, you can switch between them. All these cool features are provided. So it's creating a default Scratch org here. It takes a while. It just takes, depending on the resources, it might take a minute here. But one of the interesting aspects that I want to talk about, Julian, is Node.js. Like traditionally, Salesforce developers are not used to Node.js, and lately, in last 1 or 2 years, right, we've been sort of moving a lot of our tooling, using Node.js. My Scratch org is ready, but I still want to talk about this Node.js thing, right? So we include some scripts, like for example, this is for, let's say, linting your LWC components. We also have Aura components, which basically, existed before LWC. So, we definitely have commands to lint them. Also running this Jest test, right? So we have this, we support LWC Jest framework, right? Which is a layer on top of open source Jest testing framework, which obviously we'll explore in one of the sessions, right? So this file is pretty new to developers, Julian, but for you, it might be like really familiar as a Node developer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the main idea of this series is also get yourselves familiar with what's powering the developer tools that we have at Salesforce, and why, for example, investing time in learning not only JavaScript for Lightning Web Components development, but also Node.js is going to be a good investment for your skills as Salesforce developers. And later, you are going to see that we are announcing and we are going to introduce some other products and technologies that are going to be leveraging Node.js a lot. So uh, believe us, it is a good investment, and I'm personally making sure to create more content around JavaScript and Node.js so you get up to level to start working with the new stuff we recently announced.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you want to, activate all of these, all that you do is npm install. In fact, if you have a package.json in your working folder, it's always npm install. And what it does is it brings all the node modules that are there in the, in the dev dependencies, or if you have a dependency section. In this case, we are using all the node modules just for our development workflow. That's why you see only dev dependencies, but in your actual project there will be dependencies as well. For now it's all dev dependencies. So you just run npm install, and it's going to take some time to bring all the node modules. Meanwhile, let's actually get into our scratch arc that was created. So I'm going to open the scratch arc and let this npm install run on its own. So here we are in the scratch arc. It's an empty scratch arc. Again, Julian doesn't, comes with, again, Salesforce, right? It comes lot, out of box. So that's the power of Salesforce. Now, as you can see, if you go to this view all and say applications, there are a lot more applications. These are all standard applications, and these are all standard objects that pretty much comes with any Salesforce environment. But for now, we're going to create our own object called cars, right? So if you go to our data model here, I'm going to create two objects and show our developers how to like sort of create objects in Salesforce. For a lot of you, it might be a repetition, just a repetition, but we have developers here who are very new to the platform, like Julian.
Mhm.
It's going to be good overview of that. So let's create an object. So we go to the object manager here, and we can say create custom object, and then let's create that cars object here. Again, in Salesforce, it is pretty simple. Creating data models is pretty simple. It's just clicks and points. But one thing you have to remember is spend some time architecting your data model, defining the fields, defining the data types for the fields, defining the relationship, and really thinking about it, before you actually get onto the hands-on and build those data models. Because building is very easy in Salesforce, right? But getting the architecture right is the key here. Anyway, so for now we have cars data model, right? And look at it, you can allow reports, you can allow activities here. There's a lot of settings that goes behind this. um, so yeah, so we just say cars, and it's gonna create the object for us. So there it is, we have the object
Can
ready. Yeah.
can you increase the zoom a little bit
Yes,
on the
sir.
window?
Yes.
Thank you.
How about this, Julian?
I think it's way better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for for reminding me on that. Okay, so here it is, right? So we created this cars object, and we have this fields and relationship where we can go and add the fields. Now, interesting thing is there's already a default page layout that got created, which is essentially the layout, like how when you go onto a, let's say, a car record, how is your view? That is what a layout means. So yeah, so a lot of things comes out of box in Salesforce. Your data model drives a lot of things. So a car layout is created. Now let's go ahead, Julian, and create the configuration object called configuration. Um, and again, custom object. This is a custom object. So we go and say configuration. We say configuration here, right? And then we say, okay, we want all our reports on this as well. We save it. Pretty simple, straightforward clicks. But where it gets interesting here is how to relate, right? So that's where you have to relate these two objects. Let's say I'm relating configuration and cars object. So we relate these two objects via a relationship, which is essentially a feed. So we have like different types of lookups here. External lookups, this we choose if you have an external object and you want to link with an internal Salesforce object. Let's say you have an external object and you want to create the link, that's where we pick that. Otherwise, it's master detail or lookup. Again, both of them have considerations. There are resources that I've shared, if you want to really explore around the architecture aspect of it. But for now, we're just going to relate by lookup. and say next, and then relate to cars object. So this is what it is, so simple. So it will ask for the field name, and then you can make sure to add descriptions and help text. It always helps to, let's say your org grows and you have hundreds of fields. It makes it very easy for you to figure it out later. Like, why did you create this field? Where is this used? Also, help text is for your end users, right? So let's say on the layout, they get a little option there where they can hover over the icon and see what they need to input there. So it's really helpful. So we say next. For time being, I'm just skipping in the interest of time. And then you have field level security, right? And this is where we are secure by default. That is, anything that you create is not accessible, right? And you'll have to explicitly give access to your fields. So we have the field level security for fields that we create. We have object CRUD permissions, that is, what rights you want to give. And then we have the row level security, that is the data security, right? So depending on the persona and the roles, you can configure them. So really, these are some security concepts that you need to understand when you're working with Salesforce. And in one of the sessions, I'll probably walk you through in detail about that. But for now, I just want to be visible for, let's say, an admin profile here. And then I'm gonna so look at here. It automatically creates a page layout, and it automatically adds that field as well. So anyway, so now we have this object, right? So Julian, do you have any questions around data model?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a straightforward process to create the custom objects and do the relationships, but I'm a little bit more visual.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm like creating an architecture, I need to see the relationship between the different entities, and that's a process we are going to be seeing on the Heroku side of things. You previously show a diagram,
Yeah.
like a database
This
diagram.
This one.
Yeah, that data model.
Yeah.
Were you using like a modeling tool, or this is inside Salesforce? Something
Oh,
that allows you
yes.
to visualize the schema like
Yeah,
this.
thanks. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I completely forgot about schema builder. So you see, we have
Oh,
something called a schema builder. So you click on the schema builder, right? It basically loads. It's an application in itself on
ooh,
Salesforce, and it has references to all the objects, standard and custom objects. So now what I'm gonna do is clear all so that I have a blank canvas, right? And then select the object. Like for example, cars object is the one that we recently created. And then we have configuration object, right, that we recently created. So now what I can do is, as you can see, I can visualize the relationship between cars and configurations, right? Now, if I had any other standard object, I can select that as well and easily visualize it. Now, not only that, there are a lot more things that you can do in the schema builder. For example, you go to the element section, right? Let's say you want to add one more field to the car configuration. Let's say it is a date type, right? So all that you do is you drop, and it gives you a really nice UI for you to, sort of go through the field creation right from within the schema builder.
nice.
So yeah,
If
really powerful tool. Yeah.
if I use this, it will also, for example, if I create a new custom object on this view,
Yeah.
it will also create the layouts
Yes.
and ask me about the security profiles and the rest of things if I were using like
That's
the
an
wizard.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, it will skip some of them, but you can always go back to the setup and go through that configuration as well.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now, right? So now we need to make sure that we actually pull that metadata, right? So we made the changes, right? So you saw, Julian, that it was not code, it was all clicks. Now what we want to make sure is how do we sort of retrieve that locally, right, from our scratch arc. So we did bunch of config, right? That configuration lives right somewhere. We call that as metadata. It actually lives within Salesforce platform. We call it as metadata. Now we want to bring that metadata so that we can version control, and so that even if I lose my org, I can easily use that metadata and move that metadata to, let's say, another org. So it's pretty much like, all the configurations of the code that you're doing, you want to locally also obtain it, right? So we make it
Mhm.
very easier actually by running this command sfdx for source pull. And you can actually type in this command as here. Also, it's there in your, in your command shift P, right? So you bring the command palette and say pull source from default scratcher. So it
Oh,
basically
okay.
runs the same command. So we pull that now. So we are pulling all the metadata changes. Now, once it pulls, I want to show you a couple of things. That is, we might be assuming that, it's only data model elements that we created, right? So for example, now it just retrieved all the changes, right? So if you look at, let's look at what are the layouts, right? So look here. So it actually created not only the objects, like cars object we created, configurations we created, fields, right? But there was also layout that got added. So the layout is also retrieved, right? And then I think there was also an admin profile that we configured
Mhm.
the permissions for. So those were also retrieved. So that's how metadata works. That is, it's all interrelated, right? And the configurations that we do, right, there are different metadata types in Salesforce for, let's say, profiles, permissioning, layouts, or let's say we are coding, using LWC, or writing Apex classes, or creating tabs for these, for these objects, right? So anything that we do gets captured in the org as Salesforce metadata. And, these scratch orgs have this capability of source tracking. That means anything that you do is tracked, and then we run the command for source pull that automatically pulls all the metadata changes to your local repository. Now, source tracking is also enabled for developer sandboxes. It's a beta feature, so you can do the same commands when you have the source tracking sort of enabled on developer sandboxes.
So I don't need to worry about writing XML
Yes, you
files
don't.
and any of those. Okay, good.
Yeah, you do not have to worry about it. Now, we want to get to the Heroku content, Julian, but meanwhile, I'm going to see if there are any questions there on the chat from our
Okay, if
developers.
anybody has any questions on the chat, please let us know. We are going to be monitoring the chat. But so far, so good. I
Awesome.
don't see any questions. I will let you
Yeah,
know if there is any question.
yeah, it seems like it's straightforward. Okay, so Julian, you want me to run the slides?
Oh yes, please. If you
Oh, sure.
you
Okay,
can help me with that.
definitely. All right, so we completed our activity. Now let's move on to Heroku data services, right?
Okay.
All right.
So I previously mentioned that Heroku not only gives you a way to deploy your applications, some put your applications written in these open source languages like Node.js, Java, PHP, Go, Ruby, Python, etc. But it also has this layer of data services that allow you to extend your applications using one of the most advanced and reliable open source databases out there, which is PostgreSQL. We support Heroku Postgres as one of our official add-ons. And if you can continue in the next slide, it's one of our most uh, popular add-ons and our most popular services. We personally also use PostgreSQL as the main database for whatever we do at Heroku. So it's very battle tested, and we have been using this database for more than 10 years. We have people expert that are like expert people that manage the infrastructure behind the Heroku Postgres. So you are going to be using a product that it's right for production. And it offers the same Heroku developer experience. So it's going to be pretty easy for you to add a database to your application. And I'm going to be running an activity showing you how to add a database to your app. How can we design a schema also for our application, how to load the schema, etc. We also have, you can continue with the next slide. Okay, this is like a command of how can you provision the Heroku Postgres database using the CLI tool, the developer tool we previously mentioned on the other episodes. But you can also do it using the dashboard. So everything that can be done of the web dashboard can be done on the CLI tool. We also support Heroku Redis. Heroku Redis is a in-memory database that uses key value stores. Pretty much is a it's more simple than PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL is a relational database that supports transactionality. Redis is a little bit more dynamic in a way that you have like a key value system you can use as a distributed data store. It runs in memory, so access to the data is going to be super fast. And one of the most popular use cases of Redis is, for example, using as a cache system or cache mechanism for your applications, managing job queues. So remember that we have web processes and worker processes. You will be able to use Redis to communicate between those two and run certain activities in the Heroku platform as well.
Yeah. So Julian, one thing I want to draw an analogy here is we have something called as platform cache in Salesforce.
Mhm.
Essentially, it's for caching. Let's say you're running some intensive operation, right? And you're trying to fetch the same data again and again from the database. So we have this platform cache where you can create a platform cache in Salesforce, and that caches all the things so that you don't have to go to the database. So I think that is also primarily based on this Redis technology. And I'm so glad to like
Mhm.
see Heroku Redis being supported, because that means it's in memory caching, right? Managing job queues, like as you're saying,
Yeah.
it's really a good use case for enterprise applications, right? Again, you need Postgres for your transactional thing that you mentioned, and then you also need, let's say you want to cache and save resources, right? So you need Heroku
Yeah.
Redis.
I love distributed systems and distributed applications, and Redis is one of my favorite products out there. I rely on Redis a lot for my applications, especially when I have a distributed application. Imagine a web application running in multiple dynos. We mentioned these horizontal scalability capabilities of the Heroku platform.
Right.
And I need to share the state of my application between those different processes.
Got it.
Since those are running on different machines, I will not be able to share the state. Let's say the session information of a logged in user, for example, that information is going to live on one of those dynos. If a new request come to the second dyno that doesn't have that information, we are going to have some inconsistencies. If I use Redis to store that information, all of my different processes are going to have access to that information. And since this is running in memory, access to the data is going to be super fast. So
Awesome.
it's one of the capabilities. And both PostgreSQL and Redis can be used on the hobby tier. Pretty much,
Really?
if you want to use them for free, you can with certain limitations. Now, let's talk about Apache Kafka on Heroku. Now, Apache Kafka, it's, I will say, a different beast. It's a data service that allows you to have applications that are very responsive to real-time events. So if you are streaming data, like a huge amounts of data that need to be processed in real time, that comes from different sources, you might need Apache Kafka. We support Apache Kafka, and we have a very good price tier for companies that want to use them. Sadly, there is no free option because managing an Apache Kafka cluster is very expensive and requires a lot of different infrastructure behind. So if you want to use Apache Kafka, you will need to pay, but it's going to be super powerful for applications that demand this amount of data, this amount of information.
Yeah.
We also have the data connector that pretty much allows you to stream information from a PostgreSQL database to an Apache Kafka stream. So you can do things like, for example, connect the Salesforce CDC events, the change data capture events, store that information in Heroku Postgres using Heroku Connect, and using the data streaming connector for Apache Kafka, all of those changes, stream those on an enterprise bus. So it's for applications that require that amount of throughput.
Right.
Then we have Heroku Connect. Heroku Connect is a layer, an integration layer between Heroku and Salesforce using the OData connector.
Mm-hmm.
For Heroku Connect, we need to have a PostgreSQL database in our Heroku application, and it works in two ways. We can map Salesforce objects into my Heroku Postgres database, so I will be able to have access to leads, accounts, and even custom objects. For example, the card and the configuration object that Mohit just created on our application. We will be able to access that data as if it were a PostgreSQL database. So imagine this. We have our huge company or huge organization. An organization has a group of talented Salesforce developers, and they also have an external pool of developers that doesn't know anything about the Salesforce platform, but they are skilled on using PostgreSQL and Node.js, for example.
Mm-hmm.
These developers might want to have access to the Salesforce data, but they don't know anything about Salesforce. They can use Heroku Connect, keep interacting with Salesforce data using the PostgreSQL knowledge they have, and Heroku Connect manage the synchronization between those two tables, the table that lives on Postgres and the data that lives in Salesforce. This mapping can be bidirectional. So you can have like a read-only view. Let's say just want to bring the information to your PostgreSQL database and do queries and calculations over the data. Or if you want to have like some sort of ETL process to store data from Salesforce, like historical data from Salesforce into a PostgreSQL database, that it's also possible. But you can also enable a bidirectional connection. So any change that you do on the table in Postgres can be also synchronized back to Salesforce. So it works both ways.
Okay, one question, Julian, before we
Sure.
kind of move ahead is, so let's say I change data in Salesforce, okay? Is it, and I have the Heroku Connect, and then I have Heroku sitting on the other side, right? Let's say I change my data in Salesforce, it's going to be synced back to Heroku.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and can we define rules at the field level? Like, let's say
At the field level,
okay,
exactly.
got it.
I don't need the full Salesforce object. You know that a Salesforce
Right.
object can have like a hundred of fields. But let's say for my web application, like my custom web application, I'm deploying on Heroku using a progressive web application. I just need to have, let's say, the name and the description and the address of a contact.
Got it.
And that's the only fields I want to expose. So I just select the fields I need on the mapping section and I expose those fields on my database.
Yeah, and Julian, just to help our learners here, right? So we do have examples of integration with Kafka and Postgres in our eCars application, right?
Exactly.
And we are
So,
gonna cover that, right? We're gonna cover
yep.
that, as a part of as the series like proceeds and show some of the live examples of how we've done for eCars. But eCars is again open source. You can explore today. You can install that. On your own. You should be able to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing
Yep.
before you proceed, Julian, one thing I would like to point out here is I like the slide a lot because the consumer apps, right? It says consumer apps on Heroku. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean is, let's say you want to build a really, very good looking UI, right? A consumer facing application with, let's say, latest technologies like progressive web app, and let's say you want this application for like millions of users, let's say more than 10 20 millions of users, right? I think this is awesome because you can use Heroku for your customer apps, right? Use Heroku Connect so that you get the data that's there in Salesforce, and then use your Salesforce for your backend operations, right? Especially for employee apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. I have a couple of questions on the chat. One is, can we access Apache Kafka from Apex? And the second one is, can we do real-time sync with Salesforce objects and Heroku Postgres database? So the two questions have the same answer. Yes, you can, but you will need to have this integration add-on. So if
Yeah.
you want to sync the information between Salesforce and Heroku, you need to use the Heroku Connect.
Heroku Connect.
It is not exactly real time,
Mm-hmm.
because real time is a concept that,
Yeah.
well, it's a complex concept, but it works on this way. Heroku Connect is doing polling of Salesforce changes. So it's
Mm-hmm.
asking Salesforce if it has any change, and it's bringing those changes back to my Postgres database. And the polling times might change depending on the plan I have on Heroku Connect.
Got it.
The other synchronization option, which is if I write information on Postgres, it will trigger immediately the synchronization against Salesforce.
Mm-hmm.
So that way might be real time. Like writing is going to be real time, reading is polling. So it's going to poll information and bring that information back to the database.
Got it.
If you want to use Apache Kafka, you can use the streaming data connector using the same architecture. So bringing uh, change data capture events or any other type of operation through Heroku Connect on the PostgreSQL database, and the PostgreSQL database is going to be connected directly to the Apache Kafka bus. So yes, those are possible using the proper architecture. And we use some of that architecture in our eCars project.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to mention one last thing that you can do with the Roku Connect, and it is bringing PostgreSQL data. Let's say I have my application, I have my own tables. Those tables doesn't exist in Salesforce, but I want to expose that data on Salesforce. And what I can do using Heroku Connect is exposing those data as external objects.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that Mohit was saying that you were able to do relationships between a custom object and do like external lookup.
Yeah.
You can relate custom Salesforce objects with external objects that lives on the PostgreSQL database. Even expose those data, create reports over
Yeah.
data that you have in Postgres, and it's going to be very powerful. One use case, for example, those consumer apps or customer apps that we mentioned in this slide, is, for example, big organization or a small organization. Let's say this company acquire a third-party product
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be deployed to Heroku, but it is not integrated to Salesforce. It doesn't have any point of integration. But
Mm-hmm.
your team can develop a custom integration point, extend that application, and use Heroku Connect to connect pretty much Salesforce and this Heroku application. So that's one of the use cases you can think of, or even a third-party application or a different company you acquired, and you are bringing that company back into your bigger organization, and now you want to integrate everything with Salesforce. You can do it by
Yeah.
using Heroku Connect.
Yeah, and Julian, to add to all of these, right? The IoT use cases, for example, let's say we have a device, which is, emitting events at, let's say, a lot of events in a minute, right? Something like a car, right? For e-cars, I know we took cars as an example, but it could be like sensor, it could be any IoT device, right? Apache Kafka seems like really a good, powerful tool for that, right? Because it can, you can stream the data there, and then we can pass the data back into Salesforce to sort of show some analytics, sort of that whole streaming data, right? Or take actions based on these. So I think that's also one of the really good use cases. It's consumer apps, IoT devices, and obviously your microservices as well. So um, let's move on to activities section,
Okay.
Julian. I'm excited to sort of learn, how to create a database, in Heroku Postgres, and see in action. So I'm gonna hand
Okay.
it off to you. So
Okay.
let's see if we can get your screens here. There you go.
Fantastic. So Salesforce has a very opinionated and a defined way, or or define a data schema.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not the case of Heroku. Heroku uses PostgreSQL as the official database that we support, but we also support other databases through the Elements Marketplace. So you can use MySQL, MongoDB, some other different databases.
Mm-hmm.
Let's focus on Heroku Postgres. I'm going to be telling you one way of defining a schema on Postgres, but this might be up to your choice, up to your knowledge, the tools you might want to use. We don't have like an opinionated way of doing things. This is more open for you to achieve. So on the Elements Marketplace, we find the Heroku Postgres add-on. The Heroku Postgres is a PostgreSQL as a service that we have on Heroku and that we officially support. You can find the Hobby Dep plan, which is free. The main limitation about this plan is that you can only have 10,000 rows,
Mm-hmm.
but this is a lot for application I'm developing and I'm starting to create my own prototype, for example.
Right.
There is the Hobby Basic. The Hobby Basic is okay. I'm paying for more access for my application. Now I have access to 10 million rows and 10 gigabytes of storage capacity, so my application can be bigger.
Oh, okay.
Now, if I want to go into production, and this is similar to the same concepts with the dynos, I might need the standard database, and now we don't have any limit on the number of rows we can host on the database. We have way more space, we have RAM, and our database can have followers.
Mm-hmm.
And what this mean? It doesn't mean like the Twitter followers or people following the database. No, it means that you can have another instance of the database following changes on the main database. So you can have like a main database, a follower database to have more security over your data, or more consistency over your data. What if the main database fails? You can also access the follower database, or you can use the follower database for read-only operations, for example, and the main database for read and write in order to maintain like the performance of your app. So depending of the different tiers you are using, you might get certain features or not. And also the number of connections or concurrent connections that can access the database might be affected by the plan. You can add the Heroku Postgres add-on directly from the Elements Marketplace by clicking on the Install Heroku Postgres. You can go directly to your application and add the add-on from here, or you can go and do it on the CLI. If you don't know anything about Postgres, I will invite you to go to postgresql.org, read the documentation, start like getting familiar with it. You're going to find a bunch of different resources on the internet to go deeper by using PostgreSQL. And at the end, I'm going to recommend you 4 Trailhead live sessions that I already did on how to use or how to start like building Node.js applications using PostgreSQL. I show you 3 different techniques and also how to use Redis in a Heroku application that can be integrated with Salesforce. So those resources are going to be available for you if you want to go deeper in this concept. So let's go to the activity. We have, and remember, we created this Lightning Web Component application that we can deploy to Heroku. Let's do the deployment. I need to create a Heroku application. So let's say this is my LWC Postgres app.
Mm-hmm.
I'm creating a new application on Heroku. I'm checking if the remote is good. So now I can start like adding this application to my Git. So let's do git commit initial deploy. And we are running git push Heroku main.
That's it.
So we are deploying our application for the first time. Okay. Let's go ahead. On the meantime, to take a look at the tool we can use for designing our database. So I found a extension for Visual Studio Code called the ERD editor. This is the Entity Relationship Diagram Editor, similar to the schema builder that Mohit was showing on
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce. You can design your entities and your database using this tool inside Visual Studio, create the relationships, the different types, and it supports different databases idioms. So
Mm-hmm.
even though SQL it's kind of like a standard, certain different database engines like Postgres, MySQL might have different types or different way to run the scripts.
Got it.
So it is always good to have a tool that let us create a database schema and that tool speaks the language of the database engine we are using. I also used this DB Default tool that I show on the Trailhead Live series. It is also another graphical tool that you can use to design your database. It is free. You can use it online, or you can use any other tool that lets you design a database schema and export the script using
Mm-hmm.
the database idiom of the runtime we are going to use.
Got it.
So you can go to the default, go online, and you're going to find an interface where you can like drag tables and start adding the different properties in here.
Got
But
it.
let's take a look at this ERD editor that we are going to use in Visual Studio Code. The first step is to create a file that needs to have this extension, viewrd.json, and Visual Studio Code is going to detect that this file uses the plugin and you can start like using it. So let me open the Visual Studio Code. We have the schema.viewrd.json. It is a JSON file with all of the different information, but we are going to click on the button here on the top right, open ERD editor, and the ERD editor let us create the tables and the different fields by using a graphical tool,
Got it.
similar to the schema builder. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to create a new table, let's say I can go here, click a new table. Let's say this table is going to be called users, users for my application. And now I can start adding the fields. Let's say I need an ID. The ID is going to be a serial. So it's going to be an auto increment. Let me serial. This is a not null. And let's say I need to add a username, which is going to be a bar chart.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the string that it's not null. And I'm going to be adding a password, which is a string. And let's say I want to put an admin, if it is an admin or not.
Got it.
And let's say with false by default. And then I can say that this is going to be the primary key for my table. And that's it. This table doesn't have any relationship, but let's take a look at what I'm trying to achieve here. This is part of the schema that we use on eCars. There is a section on eCars where we have a car that is sending sensor information back to Heroku. And we are capturing that information using IoT protocols and then distributing that information using Apache Kafka. So we need to store the sensor information on the PostgreSQL database for historical purposes, if we want to run reports, and if we want to make this data available to Salesforce, for example. So we have the agents table. The agents represents a vehicle sensor agent, like the device that is sending information that uses the VIN, the vehicle identification number, as the primary key, and it has a name to identify the agent. And we have a table to store the sensor data. So every entry on the sensor data is related to that agent through the BIN field. So here we have a foreign key on this specific table, and this is why we have the relationship here. And we have all the ordered data. We have the name of the sensor information, and we have the range of the car, the battery, the speed, the location, some other data we are capturing. We can also create relationships within this user database and the agents. For example, I can go and click to create a relationship here.
Very similar to what we did in Salesforce, actually.
Exactly. I'm going to create a relationship. Let's say 1 to n. One user might have like multiple agents, for example. We can do something. So let's say relationship between users and the agents. And now let's put here the user ID, for example.
Yeah.
And now we have a relationship.
Cool.
So other option of this extension is that you can click and select the database. Right now we have it as a PostgreSQL database, but you can use any other different engine. Let's use the Postgres, and now you have access to the query information. This is the language that SQL understands. Or this is a very good option as well, and we can mention this in the future. It has a way to also get the schema information as if it were a GraphQL schema database.
Got it.
So for GraphQL is an API layer for applications that lets you query information as if it were similar to SQL by doing an HTTP request, or we can mention this in later in the series.
Yeah.
Okay, now export this schema. Let's go back to the diagram. We want to export this schema as an SQL file. And let's put it on my project. Let's say on Trailhead Live. Here on Trailhead Live, I have my first Heroku LWC app. And let's store that information. Okay, now I have the schema. The schema is the query that I can execute on my Postgres database. Now let's take a look. My application is deployed. If I go here, I can access my app, but this app doesn't have a database. So let's add the database add-on. We can do it as a command with Heroku add-ons create. Let's say we want Heroku PostgreSQL, and the add-on is going to be HobbyDev, or we can add it from the dashboard. So with the command, I added my database to Heroku, but this database is empty. So you can access this database from the CLI and also from the dashboard. So let's access from the CLI by using PG PSQL. Like the Postgres add-on and the PSQL is the CLI tool to access a Postgres database. You don't need to fetch the host name, the credentials, and the port. Everything is from here. And with this /D, I will search for the relations. I don't have any relations on my database. What I need to do is do a copy paste of this script. So I can do copy and paste it here, or I can load it if it is too long and I don't want to paste something huge. I can do the following. So let me fetch this name. I'm going to copy the name. I can execute PSQL and send the content of that file to my Heroku database.
Got it. And then it's going to create the tables, right?
Exactly. So as you can see, it executes the create table and the comments commands. I'm going again to check if these exist and the relationships exist. If I do select everything from users, Users doesn't have anything, but now I have a table I can start interacting with. And let's take a look how can we do this from the dashboard so we can finalize. I'm on my application, refresh. So I take a look at the my LWC Postgres. Let's go to resources, click on Heroku Postgres. So I access my add-on. And from here, and this is something I love about Heroku data, it's the data clips.
Data clips.
So we can go click on data clips. Data clips allow us to have a query builder and query information on the web. And the good thing is that you can create reports and share these reports with your users or people. So let's create a clip on my database. You can see that I have the different tables I created here. So I have a schema explorer. And from here, I can run my queries. So let's select everything from agents, enter a clip. This is agents, save and run. And since I don't have any result, I don't have nothing to show here, but we can start adding information on the database. Let me add information to finalize because we have like three minutes
we have
left.
2 minutes. I would like a minute at least. Julia.
Yes. So let me see the agents table. I have 3 fields. So insert into agents, the BIN, user ID, and name. Oh, let me do it on users because users just need a username and password. So username and password, values, Julian, and the password is going to be Julian123. That is not my password. Don't try to access my accounts. I inserted one user here. So let me check if I have it here. I have it here. And now I can go to data clips, show me the users, and there you go. We have the information here. And that's what I had for today, Mohit. If anybody has questions on these last 2 minutes of a stream, please let us know on the chat.
Yeah, and I just want to remind that there are helpful references here, and I'm gonna share the slides in the community link here, the chatter group here. I'm gonna share the slides on that. Please join that chatter group, Julian. Julian, if you could type that in the chat, that would be helpful.
What again?
Sorry, if you could
Oh, yeah,
type
sure.
this URL for our
Sure, of
for our
course.
audience here. Yeah. So yeah, join us there. We are gonna be continuing with content like this throughout November and December. Actually, we have next session starting in a minute here. But catch us on Thursday. Then we'll have sessions in December where we're gonna uncover the e-cards app a bit more. So yeah, join us there, and we appreciate your time here. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope all the content has been so useful. Please do share your feedbacks. Do shout outs via our Twitter handle. Reach out to us if you have any questions, and we are always happy to sort of help you there. Thank you so much, Julian. For today's content on Heroku.
Thank you, Mohit. Thank you for inviting me, and see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya. Bye bye.